This is the team that will be working alongside you this morning. My name is Megan Lloyd-Laney. I am Director of Comms Consult Office in the UK, and my team this afternoon is here with me. So, Farai, do you want to kick off by introducing yourself, and then let's go around the room.
Hi, everyone. My name is Farai Samungu. I am a director in Comms Consult. I'm based in Harare in Zimbabwe.
Perfect, thanks. Laura.
Thank you, Megan. My name is Laura French Constant. I'm based in Scotland in the far north of the UK, and I'm a digital training and learning coordinator.
Great, and Zainab.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. My name is Zainab Sabit, and I am currently based in Cairo, in Egypt, and I am a program coordinator, but also working as a consultant for Comms Consult with Megan and her team. Pleased to meet you all today.
Great. Okay, so that's us. We are hoping to chaperone you over the next hour and a half in a galloping speed, but hopefully in a participative way. We have an enormous number of people showing a range of skills and experiences in using policy briefs, crafting them so that they have an impact. We hope to be able to do this in a way that allows everybody to learn a little bit and to offer some of their experiences to their peers. So let's just start by asking you to tell us what is a little bit about your experience with policy briefs. So how do you feel about policy briefs? Have you been doing them for years and you love them? They're your best tool in your armory for influencing people? Are you a newcomer to them? Do they make you smile? Do they make you scream? So pick an emoji from the panel and post it in the chat box to just give us a flavor of, are we broadly positive or negative or benign about policy briefs? So if everybody can pick an emoji. Okay, bemused, Vincenza. Lovely, smiley, Carol, that's great. Okay. The great thing about emojis is that they're open to interpretation. They're good so far. Surprise, Carol, Vaishnavi. Okay, we're having some options here. Some of these might be because people have experience, some are new to the topic. Okay. Thumbs up. All right, good. And I'm hoping that these are based on some, okay, Mariam doesn't have a good track record with policy briefs. Good, Mariam, I hope that by the end of 90 minutes, you'll have something good to say about policy briefs. Okay, excellent. Good. So this is the way that we kind of hope that we're going to get you to interact with us in the chat throughout the sessions that we have. We're going to have now one or two polls to get a little bit more specific understanding about your confidence. So how confident are you creating and using a policy brief? So Erin, can we launch the poll? We're asking you how confident you are, not experienced, but confident are you in creating and using a policy brief? Are you expert, confident, not confident, or not sure? Erin, do we have the poll? Comms Consult colleagues, can you see it and I can't? No, there it is. So who has crafted and used a policy brief before? Right, 28 of you have. You should all be able to see the screen the same as I do. So 2/3 have, 1/3 not. We have 79 people in total. That's most of you. Okay, all right, good. So more have than haven't, but we have quite a number for whom this is the first introduction. Okay, that's grand, thank you. And the second poll question is, how confident are you in creating them? Okay, well, those quickest off the mark are not confident. We're always surer in things we can't do, though, than things we can. Not sure. Okay, interesting. So 15 confident, 26 not, some not sure. Okay, all right, so we've all seen that. So we had a variety of experiences in the room. Thanks, Erin. So our job over the next hour and a half is to bring some basic principles to the enigma that is policy briefs. And we're going to do this by structuring it in 4 main areas. First of all, it's just to ask the question, what is a policy brief? So make sure that we're all on the same page. A definition of a policy brief, what is it? Is it useful? What is the evidence that it can be helpful in the work that we do? Under what conditions does it work, and where doesn't it work? So that's the start of what we do. We're then going to look at some key principles based on experiences and some literature evidence of people who have studied the role of policy briefs and where they work in what contexts and what makes them helpful and purposeful in being impactful. Thirdly is to look at 3 easy steps, 3 things that you need to know to write and communicate using an impactful policy brief. So something about knowing your audience, a second step, which is about how you write and design a policy brief, and thirdly, what you do with it then to make sure it has impact. That will include a short session of group work where we divide you up into 4 groups, which is slightly smaller and more cozy for you to critique a specific policy brief and get some hands-on practice. And finally, some questions that a Q&A session, very short Q&A session for you to bring to us the challenges that you've had in your work to date. So let's start. Why is it, what is the value of a policy brief? Policy briefs have been around a very long time. Comms Consult have worked in the field of evidence to policy and communicating in development, and focused on evidence and evidence-informed policy for the last 15 years. And policy briefs is a very large chunk of what we do, including webinars for introductions like this for an hour and a half for people who are newcomers, right up to 5-day intensive policy briefs training where people write it based on a body of work. The reason why they're useful is that they help us to make a summary in layperson's terms for a non-specialist audience. So they're a really useful tool, and they can be powerful if crafted in the right way and delivered in the right form to the right people. So they are an amplifier of our work and a coherent and compelling vehicle for us to make a difference. So the definition, policy briefs are short documents that present the findings and recommendations of a research or a project to a non-specialist readership. They're often recommended as a key tool for communicating research or other findings. So often this body of literature comes from the work of researchers, but it's as valid for practitioners and those working in programmatic work where they're bringing together facts and findings about their work, and specifically to policy actors. So the important parts of these definitions are policy briefs are short, but they're aimed at non-specialist readerships. They're not speaking to people who are working in your field of work necessarily. So jargon isn't going to be part of the key ingredients, and that they're intended for policy actors. So not other practitioners, not academics, not the general public, but policy actors. And those are key parts that will help us inform making the most concise and impactful policy brief we can. So when should you write one? Let's not just do one because they're there and we need something extra to do. So policy briefs are particularly useful as a tool when you have something significant to say on a particular issue that requires policy attention. So they're an instrument for gaining the attention of policy actors when we need the policy actor to think or believe or act in a particular way. It specifically is useful when you want to explain and convey the urgency of an issue, when you want to present policy recommendations. So it's not so much a an information brief where you're presenting a summary of the work that you do and a description about things that you have learned. A policy brief is particularly pertinent when you have something that is compelling an action or a tweak in policy or a course correction in policy implementation. It's useful to give evidence to support the reasoning behind recommendations. So you need to write a policy brief where it's not as simple as directing in a binary way, we need to do A rather than B, but it's about explaining why policy A is going to be more, have better outcomes than policy B. And policy briefs are useful when they spell out the practical implications of a particular project or piece of research. They're also quite useful when you're trying to transmit a key set of simple messages, but you also want to maybe gain more understanding around the issue if it's complex or rapidly changing or misunderstood. So that's when a policy brief is useful to write. Okay, so do they work? There's only point in us getting better and spending time and resources on writing policy briefs if we know they're going to actually make a difference. So the evidence suggests that they work where policy interest exists. So we all know that in the lifespan of our work, policy actors, if their attention is sought, they need to be interested in the topic. And sometimes that's a timely issue. They are at some times and not others. Where the audience has capacity to absorb the findings and the recommendations. So there's little point in putting together a compelling case based on evidence if the policy actors that you're communicating with don't have the responsibility to do anything about your recommendation. They don't have the agency, they don't have the seniority, they don't have the voice or the resources. So there needs to be capacity to understand and to act on the issues. They have an impact where the timing and context are favorable. So there's very little point now in trying to get policymakers' attention around a topic like how do we gear up for a pandemic, for example. That would have been better at the beginning of COVID, where there were no answers to this question and policymakers were looking for solutions to problems. They also have an impact where the message and the conclusions are clear. That's all about the way that we summarize which facts we put in the policy brief and which facts we leave out. And that's a decision based on what we think the audience already knows and thinks and is acting on that particular issue. And policy briefs have an impact where they're just one of the communication tools, not the only one. So there was a World Bank study on policy briefs back in the early 2012, 2013, which showed that policy briefs help people who didn't have an opinion on the topic to form one. So it specifically one in line with the findings of the brief. So it helps to nudge people. Policy briefs don't always make people think one thing, which is completely different from another, but it helps to nudge them. So where do they not have an impact? So a piece of research which was done, a randomized controlled trial about policy briefs that were given to a policy acting audience. There were 690 people who responded to the survey, and they talked about, as policy actors, how a particular policy brief and the framing helped them and didn't help them to form a different opinion. So in some of the interesting findings, women are less likely to act after reading the brief. It was a small study. It was based on one particular topic. So this is not generalizable, but it is interesting. Messengers matter. So having an opinion piece from a sector expert in the brief increases the information sharing. So people tended to be cognizant of the topic itself and communicate and share its findings if it had an expert quoted in the actual brief. And readers with a high level of self-perceived influence are more likely to act as a knowledge breaker. So those who feel as though they are influentials are more likely to then introduce, share, and talk about the policy brief with others. Policy briefs fail, result of the same study, where understanding by policymakers is low, where politicians specifically who have political reasons for absorbing or not absorbing messages have a are not open to the argument. So again, it's about context. Is your audience open to learning more and having their opinions and knowledge base challenged by the findings in the policy brief? So again, interesting to think around where and how a policy brief might be used. And we will do this in step 3 about specifically how they might be used and something about timing and communication channels. So a good policy brief, in summary, is policy relevant. It is relevant to the policy question that you are working on. It is concise, it is comprehensive, clear, accurate, objective, and impartial. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour. Colleagues, are there questions that we want to respond to? Okay, the citation for the study, for sure. In our at the end of this presentation, the presentation will be shared as a PDF document. There are a set of resources that we use, the studies that we draw on, and they're public domain where you can find them in a URL. We'll certainly share those with people. Yes, good question. What proportion of females didn't act based on the policy brief compared to males? That's a good question. I should know the answer, Rosanna. I don't. It'll be in the study. A good question. Okay, so I'm going to move on to step 1. The body of this presentation is around these 3 steps of how we make an impactful policy brief. Step 1 is understanding our audience. So who is the audience for whom you are writing the policy brief? Step 2, Zainab, my colleague, will take in French the second section, which is about the science, if you like, of writing and presenting policy briefs so that they are as compelling and powerful as they can be. And step 3 is when you've got this excellent product that is fit for the audience that you intend it for, how are you going to get it to their attention? So these are the 3 steps, and we will do some group work that actually looks at a particular brief and critiques it. So I'm going to keep going unless I see any of my colleagues shouting at me or leaving the room. I realize it's a gallop. Please stop me or raise your hand in questions if there's anything that is not clear or not understood. We'll try and take them at the end of each of the sections. Okay, step 1, understanding your audience. Audience is king. Policy briefs are a tool to convey a message to a particular set of people or individuals. Knowing your audience is one of the most important things you can do before you even start picking up your pen or opening your laptop to write. You need to be super clear about who the audience is, because that then helps you to shape and craft and select the right information that will speak and resonate to your audience and make them pay attention. Because without that connection, if you're writing for an overgeneralized audience, you won't be tight enough in the way that you write. So finding the right policy actor is key. The second not rocket science thing to say is that policymakers are not a homogenous group. Policy actors, like all of us who have convened around this digital space this morning, are different. We bring different knowledge, we bring different skills and experiences, we bring different biases, and we have different roles. And it's quite important to try and unpack as much as you can about the type of actor group you are most interested in, who has the agency, the power and the role and the responsibility to do something with the findings. Because if you get their attention and they agree with you and they are in alignment with your arguments, you want them to be able to do something about it. So having a specific audience in mind will help you to write more clearly for them. And to communicate effectively, you need to understand what your audience needs, and that will make us shape not only what we say, but how we say it and how we get it into the hands of our particular audience group. One of the tools that is really useful in helping you think through that when you're thinking, who am I writing for, is a tool called ACAB, which stands for Awareness, Knowledge, Attitudes, and Behaviors. And it means when you're thinking about your target audience, you're writing a policy brief, say about more access to sexual reproductive health rights for adolescents. You're thinking, well, I want to get hold of some people in the ministry. I think there are civil society actors I want to get hold of. You break them down as much as you can and ask yourself, how aware are those people, those individual decision makers, how aware are they of the topic? What do they know about it? What is their attitude towards it? And how are they acting? What are their behaviors? And that helps you break down a little bit about what you might say. So ACAB is quite a useful tool. And policy actors work at different levels. Now, we're very much not experts in Canadian policy making, decision making at all. We work at global levels with organizations and research groups that are working on particular topics in Africa and Asia specifically. So we ask them all of these questions about breaking down policy actors. They work at different levels. So national policy actors are individuals who make or change government legislation, members of parliament, local politicians. So it's worth unpacking the national actor groups and then thinking about regional and international actor groups, parliamentary representatives, individuals or groups who work at regional or global bodies like the UN, the WHO, and then individual groups. So individual groups are either individuals who work with influence over decision-making processes, groups like the media, lobbyists and advisors. So when you're brainstorming, and this is best done collectively before you write your policy brief, think about who you're trying to reach at these different levels and what it is that you want them to know through your policy brief that they don't know currently. One of the ways that you can do that is there's another tool which is called the alignment and interest matrix. And it's you get a flip chart, you get a piece of paper, you get a bunch of people around the room who know about your topic, and you ask yourself, who are we trying to write the policy brief for? Who are we trying to reach with this particular tool? And you can ask yourself some questions based on, let's identify individuals. Maybe they work at national level, they work at regional level, they are our practitioner colleagues, maybe they're individual members of the media. And ask how interested they are in your topic. So do they agree with our approach? Your policy brief is, as we've said earlier, is going to have a body of evidence, but is likely to have some implications and recommendations that you're trying to lead people to do, urging them, nudging them to do. Do they agree with our approach? Do they agree with our assumptions? Do they share our ambition? Do they want to do the same thing that we think needs to be done? And are they thinking what we're thinking? So you then plot them along the x-axis, along the horizontal axis. If they are in agreement with our approach and they agree with our assumptions, they go further along that grid. So your actor D is further along that axis than your actor A in that graph. And then you ask yourself a second set of questions, which is, are they committing time and energy? So are they aligned with what you're advocating? So people can be interested in your topic. Most politicians would nod if you talk to them about the importance of a whole public health sector reform, for example, or support for public health, primary health care systems. But it doesn't mean that they are going to invest resources or vote in favor of those decisions. So alignment is around whether they are acting and in agreement with the recommendations and your direction of travel. And that's quite useful, again, to get a little bit more granularity in your audience. So is our policy brief aimed at those who are interested but not acting in the direction of travel that we want to go? Or is your policy brief aimed at those who are aligned but actually don't have enough information to advocate? So again, it's a tool. In our resources, we will show you where to get more information from how to use the alignment and interest tool. And these are just an overview of how you might then work with those particular actor groups that you have mapped on your quadrant. The second set of things to think about with your audience, once you've identified them, is something about your evidence. So you need to choose the most salient and robust and compelling facts to make the most convincing arguments. So how legitimate and credible are your findings? Are they correct and verifiable? You need to be accurate, you need not to distort, you need to make sure you can substantiate the facts that you're using to advocate a particular recommendation. Are you presenting your facts clearly? Are you getting involvement of others who can maybe advocate on your behalf? So it's not a single institution that is trying to convince an audience. There's always more credibility if there's more than one voice, more than one organization presenting evidence. And do you recognize that there are different forms of knowledge? So there's research knowledge, there's practitioner knowledge, the results and the evaluations of practical work done by NGOs. There's action research that's done in consultation with lots of different bodies of groups. So knowledge can exist in different forms, and it tends to validate each other if you can bring different forms of knowledge to the table. Okay, so let's go to the questions. Okay, thanks. So my colleagues have shared some of the resources. That's great. Slide deck's going. Okay, all right, great. So lots of information there. That's the end of step one, which is very much about audiences. So let's share a little bit about the diversity of policy audiences that you are either currently trying to communicate with through policy briefs or wanting to engage with using this policy brief tool. So can you just in the chat box, and again, the more specific your audience, the more likely it is that you will be able to write clearly for them. So let's not, if you can put in the chat, just to give us all a flavor of the kinds of policy audiences that you're trying to reach. Not on the basis of Ministry of Health, that's too broad, there's too many people doing too many roles. But give us some flavor to see the variety of audiences that you're trying to reach with a particular body of knowledge for which you think a policy brief is useful. Anyone, we won't pick on you if we see your answers in here. Elected officials, okay. Okay, so there's lots of practitioners. Comms Consult colleagues, while we have these answers coming in that everybody can see, would you like to just add one or two things that we've learned from running these policy brief trainings in the past? What kind of lessons have we learned related to audiences and how you target and segment them?
Hi, Megan.
All right, please.
You know, there's something that stuck in my mind a couple of years back when we were in Nairobi, and we had a policy panel with researchers and policymakers. And the issue that we've been talking about, understanding your audiences, is really, really important. And, you know, one of the policymakers, I think, listened when people were talking, presenting what they knew. And, you know, he said, you know, one of the things that I often find interesting is that as researchers, you often make an assumption that as policymakers, we don't understand and we don't have knowledge of the things that you're talking about. When in fact, we actually do, and we have lots of knowledge from different places. And so when you're communicating to us, I think, you know, he was trying to say, communicate to us as people who have some knowledge and you understand that we do have knowledge. And so whatever it is that you want to then add or to communicate with us must add value to what we already know and what we're looking for. Because there is a danger that you're going to tell me some things that I already know that are not going to add any value, and it's pointless. So if you see me not paying attention or not doing anything, it is a result of the fact that maybe your research wasn't so useful to me. So really, it's understanding your audiences and what knowledge they have is really, really important.
Okay, yeah, and that's a great one, Farai. And it's about also the timing by which we make assumptions about what our audience knows. But actually, a lot of the time we know, or we can access those audiences or the proxies who are close to them, to ask them and pre-test a little bit before we actually write and print our policy brief. So let's check our assumptions about what they know and what they think about the topic. And it's the same with a piece of work, is if we start to engage with people early on and stress test a little bit about, well, if we included this in our project, would that be useful to you? Does that give a solution that you're looking for an answer for? So I think communication at the beginning of the cycle, before we actually write and print 500 policy briefs or launch it on multiple social media platforms. Okay, so we've got lots of diversity in here, some real specificity, which is really helpful. And the tension sometimes is, yes, we want to be specific, but it's not efficient to write a policy brief for just 10 people. We're having to write a policy brief that does actually speak to multiple audiences. And I think get as detailed and nuanced as you can about your audience, and then maybe cluster them into different smaller groups and what kind of key messages is going to resonate with them. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much. So a question, you're saying that we need to engage the stakeholders. We're trying to influence through our policy brief before we even start working on it. My instinct and the hunch from speaking to policy panels is that that's the only way, even if you can't get directly to them, it's just taking the key body of your message, the 3 or 4 headline findings that you think is going to support your policy recommendation, and stress testing them just informally before you finalize your brief, because it might be something about the robustness of the evidence that is required that you don't have yet. It might be something about the way that you're framing it that is going to put people's backs up or not convince them. It might be something about the timing. So I think it's always worth trying to ask yourself before you declare to the world, is the world going to be surprised? Is the world going to listen? And getting as close as you can to that before you finalize the brief, I think is really important. It should not bias what you say completely, because you have a message to deliver, but it's just that it's the iteration and the validate. Yeah, Rina, quick question. Let's go. And then I'm going to hand over to Zainab. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
Hi, this is Rina. The interesting fact that the previous question is very interesting, because I'm on the other side of the hook, because I'm a researcher. So it's interesting to know that to whom we are writing the policy, and to hear that they say that they know everything. And sometimes we researchers, we assume that that people don't know our work, and we use too much of a jargon in a scientific basis. So that's quite interesting to know that people knows as much as we want them to know. And because we don't use like a lot of, we try to make it as simple as possible so that people know our work as much as possible, and it's not full of scientific jargons. So sometimes it's, sometimes we are blamed that we use too much of jargon. And now it's interesting to see the other side of the point, that that we try to use too much simplified things, that and they know it, and so they already know it. and so they are not interested. So the thing is like, my question is like how to make it a balanced perspective so that a lot of people know our scientific presentation, and then we can use, reach out as much as people, and at the same time make it interesting and scientific enough to the whole public that we want to access to. Like, for example, I'm working for adolescent people, mostly adolescent young girls, and I'm working in the field of sexual reproductive health. So I want to reach out to the young girls and young boys as well, the adolescent age group, and to make them interesting that it's okay to share their sexual health problem, and it's okay that they won't be judged, because since I represent with the from the community where you can talk openly about sexual health. So in order to like encourage the young people about to come out and share their problems, so that it's easier for us as a researchers and scientists to report the actual issues, so that we can reach out to the policymakers, the health ministry, and all the health programmers. So we need to find a place where we can report that what these adolescent people actually think, instead of like we assuming that maybe it's the access to the condoms or whatever.
It's a really good question, Rena, and I don't think that there's a simple answer. I think it's about, you know, we say that the policy brief is one tool, and what we need to do is check that we are giving information that is largely adding to people's knowledge, and also asking the so what question. So that's another tool that we use all the time, is we bring this body of knowledge together. Maybe it's already what people know, but if they're not acting on it, we need to ask ourselves, so what information is going to make people act? And maybe it's not actually the tool that's a document that you need, it's bringing the young people together with the policymakers to have that conversation. So I think it's strategic communication is about, the policy brief is one tool. There are other tools in your armory, and you need to think through which one we should use for which purpose. So it's just knowing kind of your audience. So I think it's a really good question. I would love to have the definitive answer, but you know, the world would have been improved if we had simple answers. I think we must just do one step at a time. But that's a great question. I'm going to stop you. Excuse me, please forgive my rudeness. I need to hand back to Zainab. If you still have the question at the end and we have time, please bring it back to us.
Yes, sure.
But thank you for that question. Zainab, I'm going to hand over to you, my lovely. I've run over inevitably, so I'm going to keep you to timing on this one.
No worries. Thank you very much, Megan. And hello, everyone again. Excuse me. I'm going to switch to French now. So just giving you heads up in case you want to change the translation, the interpretation channel. Ok, bon, alors rebonjour à toutes et à tous. Maintenant, on passe à la deuxième étape de nos discussions d'aujourd'hui, qui est l'étape de l'art de rédiger votre énoncé de politique. Alors, vous allez voir là sur le diapositive, ça c'est vraiment le format ou le modèle qui est le plus couramment utilisé en termes de sections sur lesquelles on se focalise dans un policy brief ou dans un énoncé politique. Souvent, vous allez trouver le contexte suivi par l'énoncé du problème, après l'historique ou la situation ou le background historique. Et on passe de ça au résultat. C'est là où on se focalise vraiment sur tous les résultats du travail de recherche. Si jamais on est en train de rédiger un énoncé politique sur un travail de recherche spécifique. Et les résultats, souvent, préparent le terrain pour les implications et les recommandations. Et on finit là et on rajoute une dernière section assez courte sur les références. Dans laquelle on peut citer en fait toutes les ressources que nous avons utilisées, ou même les détails ou le lien vers le travail de recherche sur lequel on s'est basé en rédigeant l'énoncé politique. Je voudrais peut-être vous rappeler que ça, c'est vraiment le format sur lequel nous, on travaille le plus souvent parce qu'il est le plus couramment utilisé. Ceci étant dit, il n'y a pas que ça. qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Ça veut dire que souvent, vous allez trouver des organisations où chacune aura son modèle pour l'énoncé politique spécifique avec un petit changement dans ces sections, peut-être des fois dans l'intitulé des sections, ou alors au lieu d'avoir le contexte, on a une section qui s'appelle introduction et ainsi de suite. L'idée, c'est vraiment, donc indépendamment des intitulés des sections, l'idée, c'est de vraiment couvrir en fait les différentes, on va les appeler peut-être phases de l'idée ou de l'argumentation qu'on est en train de présenter pour qu'on arrive à convaincre l'audience. Alors, ce qu'on va faire maintenant, c'est qu'on va discuter de chacune de ces sections et après, bon, on verra si vous avez des questions. Tout d'abord, le contexte. Pourquoi est-ce que c'est important de parler du contexte? Le contexte, en fait, c'est une section qui n'est pas très longue, mais c'est vraiment un paragraphe qui explique la situation qui donne lieu à mon travail. Donc, si par exemple, je suis en train d'écrire un énoncé politique basé sur mon travail de recherche, l'idée, c'est de rédiger un paragraphe qui explique quelle est la situation qui a mené à ce travail de recherche et lui a donné lieu. Illustrer aussi à l'audience comment ou dans quelle mesure est-ce que je comprends le contexte sur lequel j'ai développé mon argumentation. C'est aussi une section qui fait le lien entre mon travail et les enjeux médiatiques et politiques actuels pertinents pour mon public. Donc, si par exemple, je travaille sur une thématique liée à la santé et aux questions du genre dans un pays spécifique, c'est dans le contexte où je vais pouvoir dire un peu plus sur le contexte dans ce pays et sur cette thématique spécifique qui a donné raison à mon travail de recherche et mon argumentation. Ça, c'est en ce qui concerne le contexte. Donc, l'idée, ce n'est pas vraiment d'aller trop dans les détails ou utiliser une grande partie de mon énoncé politique sur le contexte, mais l'idée, c'est de vraiment montrer à mon audience que je comprends dans quelle situation je suis en train de travailler et aussi attirer l'attention pour que la personne passe à la section suivante. Donc, c'est vraiment l'idée de séduire en fait mon audience par le contexte pour que la personne qui lit l'énoncé politique continue et passe à la section suivante. Tout de suite après le contexte vient l'énoncé du problème. L'énoncé du problème est une section à laquelle je tiens particulièrement à cœur. Vous n'allez peut-être pas souvent la trouver avec un intitulé spécifique énoncé du problème, mais c'est très rare de trouver un énoncé politique qui n'a pas la problématique. Ça, c'est vraiment la problématique. Alors, des fois, vous allez trouver la problématique mélangée dans la section du contexte ou même mélangée dans la section de l'introduction. Nous, ce que nous, on a toujours recommandé à tous les chercheurs et tous les publics avec lesquels Megan et son équipe, nous avons travaillé, c'est de garder une place dans l'énoncé politique pour la problématique. Et des fois même, on encourage les gens, si on essaye d'avoir un policy brief ou un énoncé politique assez visuel, de mettre la problématique vraiment encadrée parce que c'est là où je vais vraiment expliquer quelle est la problématique sur laquelle je base mon argumentation. Et encore une fois, c'est là où je peux attirer davantage l'attention et l'intérêt de mon public. Qu'est-ce qu'on met là-dedans? Ce qu'on met là-dedans, c'est vraiment le problème. Donc, par exemple, je suis en train de parler de la situation de la santé publique dans mon pays et je voudrais proposer à la fin de mon policy brief ou mon énoncé politique des recommandations et des réformes. Pourquoi? Quelle est la problématique? Quel est le problème actuel? C'est ça ce que je vais inclure dans mon énoncé du problème, mais je vais aussi parler d'audience. C'est très important de mentionner, bien sûr, une fois que vous aurez fait l'exercice de l'identification de l'audience dont Megan nous a parlé tout à l'heure, et vous aurez une meilleure idée de l'audience pour laquelle ou pour lesquelles, si elles sont nombreuses, vous êtes en train de rédiger le policy brief, c'est de vraiment mentionner à qui je suis en train de m'adresser. Ça, c'est très important aussi pour le lecteur pour réaliser l'intérêt qu'il peut y avoir dans l'énoncé politique pour lui ou pour elle. Pardon, je sais pas pourquoi. Ah bah voilà. Donc là-dedans, je vais parler de mon problème. Quelle est l'étendue du problème? Qui est touché par le problème? Et pourquoi est-ce que c'est important pour mon audience de m'écouter et de lire mon énoncé politique? Et quelles en sont les conséquences pour la société, l'économie ou la gouvernance? Donc, je ne vais pas trop aller dans les détails. Souvent, l'énoncé du problème, c'est vraiment un ou maximum 2 paragraphes dans lesquels ou dans lequel j'essaie de répondre à la question qui est mon audience, quel est mon problème, pourquoi est-ce que c'est important et quelles sont les implications pour la société et puis finalement, qu'est-ce que je recommande. Mais vraiment très, très brièvement parce que vous allez voir que dans les prochaines sections, on va aller un peu plus dans les détails de chacune de ces thématiques ou de ces questions. Une fois j'aurai terminé mon énoncé de problématique ou mon énoncé du problème, on passe à l'historique ou le background historique. Il y a des gens qui appellent cette section l'introduction. Là, c'est vraiment une élaboration de ce que j'ai mentionné dans la section du contexte. Là, je peux vraiment utiliser beaucoup de l'information et des preuves que j'ai utilisées dans mon introduction, l'introduction de mon travail de recherche, si mon énoncé politique est basé sur un travail de recherche. Et je vais un peu plus dans les détails de la situation et l'historique de la situation. Donc, je développe l'énoncé du problème. J'essaye d'attirer au maximum l'attention de mon public et susciter un intérêt, une curiosité pour qu'il continue à poursuivre la lecture de mon énoncé politique. Et puis, mon objectif devrait aussi approfondir la compréhension du contexte et du lien qui existe entre le contexte et le travail que je suis en train de présenter. Donc, je vais parler des causes de la situation actuelle, je vais parler aussi des effets de la situation actuelle et je peux aussi élaborer un peu plus sur qui pourrait participer dans les solutions que je vais proposer dans mes recommandations et mes implications à la fin de mon énoncé politique. Après, on passe à la section qui est que personnellement je considère comme la section la plus consistante et qui est vraiment remplie de evidence ou de preuves, qui est la section des résultats. Nous, on appelle cette section la viande de l'argumentation. Pourquoi on l'appelle comme ça? Parce que c'est là où je vais vraiment avoir l'espace et l'occasion d'aller un peu plus dans les détails de mes résultats et de prouver au lecteur que, en fait, ce que je suis en train de proposer est crédible. Pourquoi est-ce que c'est crédible? Parce que c'est basé sur des preuves. Donc là, je vais vraiment prendre l'espace de parler de mon travail. Qu'est-ce que j'ai appris à travers mon travail de recherche? Quels ont été les résultats? Qu'est-ce que j'ai réussi à comprendre de la situation actuelle et du contexte et de la problématique? Aussi parler des initiatives. Si par exemple, ce n'est pas un travail de recherche, mais c'est un projet spécifique que je suis en train de suggérer, quelles sont les initiatives ou les interventions que ce projet ou programme propose. Je résume les résultats et les analyses que j'ai faites et sur lesquelles je base mes recommandations. Je souligne les avantages et les occasions et puis finalement, je présente les données pertinentes et importantes qui justifient ce que je propose comme recommandation. Il est très important en fait ici pour moi de vous rappeler que cette section ne signifie pas de tout dire. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Ça veut dire que, par exemple, nous, on a beaucoup travaillé avec des chercheurs qui ont fait des travaux de recherche sur différentes thématiques liées au développement. Souvent, ce que nous avons rencontré comme défi, c'est un chercheur va essayer de dire le maximum des résultats. Ce que vous devez retenir, c'est que l'objectif, ce n'est pas de toucher à tous les résultats, mais de choisir les résultats de mon travail qui sont pertinents. Pertinents Par rapport à quoi? Par rapport à ce que je propose comme recommandation dans cet énoncé politique. Donc, n'hésitez surtout pas à éliminer de votre énoncé politique ou ne pas toucher certains résultats. Le plus important, c'est de se focaliser sur la pertinence. Donc, la partie des résultats qui sont pertinents, de ne pas trop aller dans les détails de la technique parce que souvent, vous allez avoir des audiences qui n'ont pas le background technique qui leur permettent de comprendre tous les détails de la méthodologie technique que vous avez utilisée, mais de vraiment utiliser la partie qui est un peu plus attirante pour eux dans les résultats. Une fois que j'ai développé les résultats, je vais passer à la section suivante qui est la section que souvent, auparavant, dans tous les ateliers de travail que nous avons organisés avec l'équipe Comms Consult, ce fut souvent la section la plus challenging pour beaucoup de personnes avec qui nous avons travaillé, qui couvre les implications et les recommandations. Pourquoi je dis challenging ou que les gens considèrent souvent comme ceci comme étant un défi? Parce qu'il y a souvent une petite confusion entre implication et recommandation. Et des fois même, les gens les utilisent d'une manière un peu interchangeable. Et l'objectif de la discussion qu'on va avoir aujourd'hui et surtout de ce diapositive, c'est de souligner les différences entre implication et recommandation parce que les nuances sont là, ce n'est pas exactement la même chose. Des fois, vous allez trouver des énoncés politiques dans lesquels il n'y a que les implications. Des fois, vous allez trouver ceux dans lesquels il n'y a que les recommandations et parfois même, vous allez trouver les deux. Donc, c'est très important de comprendre les nuances et les petites différences qu'il y a entre les deux. Alors, quelles sont ceux-ci ou celles-ci? Les implications, c'est vraiment les points qui décrivent ce qui pourrait arriver. Donc, moi, j'ai déjà parlé de la situation actuelle, j'ai parlé de la problématique. Dans cette section, je vais parler si aucune action n'est prise, si aucune mesure n'est sollicitée ou n'est mise en œuvre. Qu'est-ce qui pourrait arriver? Et souvent, ce qui pourrait arriver dans ce cas-là est quelque chose de négatif, de nuisible, parce que c'est par rapport à une problématique. Ce sont aussi des implications qui sont moins directes que les recommandations. C'est-à-dire que je ne suis pas en train de dicter ou de dire à mon audience, il faut faire ceci et cela, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ce n'est pas aussi direct, mais je suis en train de les alerter, les audiences, de qu'est-ce qui pourrait arriver si vous ne prenez pas une action. Ça peut aussi être quelque chose de positif. Donc, une implication positive. Qu'est-ce qui pourrait arriver si vous prenez les mesures ou les réformes nécessaires? Dans les implications, je présente les options, dont ce qui pourrait arriver si rien n'est fait, quelles sont les options ou quelles sont les options si les mesures sont prises. Et les implications sont souvent très utiles lorsque l'orientation que je suis en train de prendre avec mes énoncés politiques n'a pas été demandée directement ou je sens qu'elle ne sera pas la bienvenue si je propose une recommandation, une action directe. Alors que les recommandations, c'est vraiment des actions que je propose très, très directement en fait. Donc, je décris ce qui devrait être arrivé, quelles sont les réformes qui doivent être faites, quelles sont les mesures que mon audience doit entreprendre. Les changements proposés, bien argumentés, je me base sur les preuves de mes résultats. Il faut aussi que les recommandations soient réalisables et faisables. Donc, je ne peux pas ou je devrais éviter plutôt de proposer des recommandations qui ne sont absolument pas réalisables dans le monde actuel ou dans la situation actuelle du pays dans lequel je travaille. Je décris clairement ce qui devrait arriver ensuite. Et aussi, les recommandations peuvent être présentées selon un échéancier. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Je peux présenter ou diviser mes recommandations entre des recommandations sur un court terme, un moyen terme et un long terme. Alors, permettez-moi, avant de passer, je sais que je dois aller un peu plus vite là parce qu'on est un peu court par rapport au temps, mais peut-être pour vous donner une meilleure idée, je voudrais vous parler d'un petit exemple très basique, mais qui est lié en quelque sorte à la thématique sur laquelle vous travaillez. Donc, imaginons qu'il y a un travail de recherche dont l'objectif est d'attirer l'attention des décideurs politiques sur des réformes qui sont nécessaires dans le secteur de la santé ou les services de santé sexuelle et reproductive. Et l'idée, c'est de leur proposer des réformes pour des services qui sont un peu mieux adaptés aux jeunes et aux adolescents. Donc, je suis en train de rédiger un énoncé politique sur cette question. Et je pense à mes implications et mes recommandations. À titre d'exemple, une implication pourrait être que actuellement, l'accès des jeunes et des adolescents aux services de santé sexuelle et reproductif est très, très limité. Et si jamais cet accès n'est pas amélioré, il risque d'y avoir une augmentation dans le nombre ou le taux de maladies sexuellement transmissibles entre les adultes et les jeunes. Ça, c'est une implication parce que je ne suis pas en train de dicter quelle est l'action qui doit être prise, mais qu'est-ce qui pourrait arriver si jamais il n'y a rien qui est fait de la part des décideurs politiques. Et pour la recommandation, ça serait de dire aux décideurs politiques qu'il faut faire un travail de sensibilisation des jeunes, qu'il faut améliorer les services et augmenter les points où on offre ce type de services, et puis finalement aussi faire des formations pour les gens qui travaillent dans le secteur de la santé. Voilà, on peut en discuter davantage dans l'exercice du groupe. Après la section des implications et des recommandations, on passe aux références et là, on essaye d'inclure vraiment les ressources que nous avons utilisées ou les sources de nos preuves pour que si jamais le lecteur voudrait avoir davantage d'informations, on peut aussi citer, si jamais je me base sur un travail de recherche que j'ai développé ou préparé, où ça se trouve. Et puis finalement, sur ce diapositive, je vais aller un peu plus vite, mais vous allez avoir la présentation. Il y a vraiment ce qu'on appelle des top tips ou ce qu'il faut faire ou ce qu'il faut éviter quand on est en train de rédiger un énoncé politique. Et donc, des choses à faire, c'est assurez-vous que les paragraphes sont concis, pas trop longs, utilisez les titres et les sous-titres parce que ça attire vraiment l'attention du lecteur. Continuer à dire au lecteur ce qui va venir dans la section suivante et utiliser aussi des listes et des puces, peut-être aussi des graphiques et des couleurs. Ce qu'il faut éviter de faire, c'est des phrases longues et complexes à lire, les jargons ou les terminologies qui sont très, très techniques, éviter d'être très répétitif ou d'envoyer des messages conflictuels, et éviter les tableaux et les graphiques qui ne sont pas compréhensibles et pas faciles à lire par les lecteurs, et éviter de faire des recommandations politiques sans vraiment se baser sur les preuves pour soutenir votre argumentation. Ça, c'est vraiment un modèle qu'on utilise très souvent et qu'on appelle la pyramide des messages, et c'est pour vous faciliter le développement des messages. Vous allez avoir un peu plus de détails dans les ressources qu'on va partager avec vous, mais l'idée, c'est vraiment de diviser vos messages en premier message qui annonce en fait qu'est-ce que je veux dire comme message principal. Après, en petits points, les messages principaux. Donc, je vais diviser le message principal en petits messages. Et puis, finalement, la base de ma pyramide, c'est vraiment les points de soutien et les preuves qui soutiennent les messages que je suis en train d'envoyer. On l'appelle pyramide parce que ça part de l'énoncé principal en développant un peu plus des messages principaux et puis les preuves. Ça, c'est un modèle sur lequel vous pouvez vous baser quand vous développez chacune des sections sur lesquelles j'ai touché pendant ma présentation tout à l'heure. Il y a aussi un autre modèle qui est très utile qui s'appelle le modèle AIDA, et c'est vraiment basé sur l'idée de sensibiliser le lecteur, susciter l'intérêt, donner envie d'agir avant de susciter une action à travers les recommandations. C'est très, très important de vous poser tout le temps la question: est-ce que ce que je suis en train de dire, c'est clair? Est-ce que c'est facile à comprendre par mon audience? Sinon, essayez de réécrire d'une façon un peu plus simplifiée. Reposez-vous cette question dans chacune des sections pour essayer de vous assurer d'avoir un langage qui est compréhensible pour le lecteur. Et puis, très important, c'est utiliser des images qui sont puissantes. La visualisation de vos données est très importante quand il y a un énoncé politique parce que ça attire vraiment l'attention du lecteur. Et les images puissantes, positives, c'est également important. Par exemple, on a souvent l'habitude de voir, si on parle du continent africain, des images qui sont un peu négatives ou qui montrent les côtés négatifs. Pensez aussi à montrer des images qui sont positives. Si je parle des questions liées au genre, de montrer des images des femmes qui sont impliquées plus dans la société parce que ça montre aussi qu'on est en train de vivre un changement où ça montre les côtés positifs aux lecteurs et ça peut susciter un intérêt encore plus fort chez eux. La visualisation des données, il y a différentes façons de le faire. Ça, c'est des exemples sur le diapositive. Et je voulais aussi vous montrer Canva, qui est un des outils à utiliser si jamais vous voulez développer un énoncé politique, un PDF avec un peu plus d'animation ou même une présentation par PowerPoint. Pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas, ça c'est le lien. Essayez de naviguer un peu sur le site web. C'est très facile à utiliser ou user-friendly, comme on dit. Voilà, je suis désolée, je suis peut-être allée un peu plus au-delà du temps, mais je passe la parole à Megan, ma collègue, qui va introduire le travail de groupe. Merci, Megan.
Thanks, Zainab. Okay, so lots of information about proposed structure. As Zainab says, organizations often have their own templates. So this is just the suggested architecture where you can present the facts and the implications in a logical way, and then how you make them visual. So we are short of time, like the policy actors that we're communicating with. We have a set of group work where I think Erin, let's make that group work slightly shorter. Let's do 10 minutes. Let's go into smaller groups and let people bring questions. There seem to be some questions or clarifications or experiences. There is a group assignment we were going to do to critique a particular policy brief. I think we might not have time to do that. I will leave that to the facilitators. So if I can ask that we go into groups, let's use that time in smaller groups to ask questions of clarifications. We are all familiar with the content. We should be able to answer them and or share the policy brief to look practically at. So let's take the theory and these top tip principles and actually apply them to a very specific document and say, so what do we think about that one? So Laura, my colleague, has shared the two policy briefs. One is in English on climate change. One is in French. They are examples. We will also share those in the groups, but if you want to download them while you're here, we can also share them as a Google Doc. So let's go into those groups. Let's make that 10 quick minutes and then come back for the final section on how we make that communication policy brief impactful. You should get a box. Just join your group and you will be assigned. Thanks, Erin. Hi again. The drama of group work is that you're halfway through a really interesting question, and like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, for those who know it, you suddenly are transported to a parallel universe. So I'm sorry, let us pick up. There will be emails, I'm sure, afterwards. Let's pick up on the questions that didn't have proper answers afterwards. My group didn't look at the critique, the policy brief. We had a chat, which seemed to me the most useful thing. So I hope that was helpful for people. We have a very brief 10 minutes remaining. I know that some of you are going straight on to another session. So I am going to cherry pick my way through the remaining step 3 with your blessing, and then leave a little bit of time for questions. So I'm going to do this in 5 minutes without just garbling, I hope. You have your perfectly crafted policy brief. You're confident that it's written for the right person, that it contains the compelling evidence, that it's well designed, and that it will gain attention of the people that you desperately need to know what you know. Having it and publishing it on a website is not going to move the needle on your cause, arguably. There's too much information out there. The world is busy, full of white noise. Policy actors are the most busy and have more attention deficit than the rest of us. So you have to be smart about what you do with your policy brief in order to get the attention of people who you want to get. So communication is not the same as dissemination. We fight a good fight in Comms Consult to getting people to realize that dissemination is opening the door and shouting very loudly and maybe very articulately in multiple languages in the hope that people will hear us. It's not the same as communication. Communication is having a cyclical connection with your audience and understanding what they're interested in and having the timing to join the conversation, like at a awkward cocktail party where you sidle up to a group and you have to hear what they're talking about and then add something that adds value to the conversation. It doesn't help us that policy-making processes all over the world, don't know about Canada, but all over the world are messy and complicated, that they have these basic elements that we're all familiar with. Agenda setting, policy is formulated, a decision is made, resources applied, the policy gets implemented. In a perfect world, it gets monitored, and then the feedback means that it's implemented in a slightly better way. There are different groups of decision makers involved in all of the aspects of that cycle, and some of those are going to be your targets for your policy brief. And if that isn't complicated enough, it turns out that each of those actor groups have authority and a contribution over each of those different cycles of the policy making process. So which one do you target? At what timing with your policy brief? Even if you narrow it down to one actor group, say the cabinet, it turns out that cabinets don't have the only power and responsibility over any one of those processes, that they're talking to the other actor groups. So this makes it really complicated and complex, and it's not static. So we have to think carefully about at what point do we join the merry-go-round with our policy brief in those decisions. The other factor that makes it complicated, I'm not going to speak to all of these, is that evidence, we all belong to nations that claim they're evidence-based. Which country is not evidence-based in its policy making? In rhetoric, none of them. So evidence in reality is only one of many, many different pressures on decision makers to make decisions. And I think we have to be very not naive in understanding the role that evidence has and other factors have in influencing and nudging decisions. Here is a map of Canada's policymaking landscape. This is a URL that we will share afterwards. You will know this better than us, but you need to understand it and which bits of it are more open to engaging with your actor group than others. And finally, rather than leaving you with this overarching, it's complicated and difficult and fast moving, and actually, you know, let's all go and lie down in a cold room with a flannel over our heads. We've done the job of getting a policy brief together. It's useful to try and simplify the complexity. So here's a complicated graph produced by an organization called the Overseas Development Institute, who had a very good program called Research and Policy in Development. And they said, let's think very simply about the world that we're trying to influence as having three broad areas that we need to think about. One is the political context. So decisions in international development are political. So we need to think about politics and the political economy of how decisions are made. We've talked a bit about that. Secondly, we need to think about evidence. So we need to think about what is the body of facts that is going to be most compelling and most enticing for the audience that we're trying to gain the attention of. And we need to then frame our knowledge or align ourselves with others who can help build that evidence base in order to put it to those communities. And thirdly, who are the people that are going to hear and help us get that message across? It might not be us. If we're a tiny institution working in Canada, below the radar, great reputation, but a bit of a niche agency, how are we going to reach these very big, important people? And it might be that we don't do it ourselves, that we need to align with others who are greater amplifiers or influencers, or use the media to help amplify and springboard our message so that our audience hears it. So just thinking through those three areas. Okay, so let's think about the politics. Let's think about the evidence. What do we have to tell them? So those are the demand side, the supply side, and the linkage side. Who can we work with who have greater credence, reputation, visibility, brute force than we do, resources? And how do we use them to get our message across? So we are now, wow, a whole 4 minutes to ask a question. Before we finish, there's a couple in the chat. Have we dealt with them, colleagues? Somebody? Okay, that's been answered. Right, any overarching takeaways, reflections from people's own experience? We had lots of people who were, it seemed to me, already experienced and had a track record in writing policy briefs. Any last offers of wisdom from the crowd, wisdom of the crowds? Anyone want to add anything? Yes, Demetria, you have a hand.
Hi, thank you very much. I actually had a question, but I mean, where I have worked in the past, we used images. So some of the images you showed were actually images that we developed, and how effective those are in kind of making the connection with policymakers. So do you advocate overall that we should incorporate photos in our policy briefs?
So it's a really good question. I think they have a really useful and strategic role in gaining attention, right? Text on its own is dull and they have too much of it. So is it going to impart something that words on their own can't? Is it going to be the thing that grabs the attention and sets it apart from the other policy briefs on a digital website? Is it going to create some kind of emotive connection without exploiting those images? So I think images are really important if they add value that you can't get across in words. They take up space though, so it's a trade-off. I don't think you can, I think layout can do an awful lot. You can do an awful lot without using actual photographic images. I think infographics and animations are very powerful, but I do think that, you know, development is a very human industry. And if we take all of the reality out of it in our need to provide evidence and statistics and econometrics, but we leave the human beings behind, I think we might be falling into the trap of leaving people behind. Colleagues, anybody else want to add? It's a very kind of emotional, subjective view. Farai, Zainab, Laura, Jen. No additions on that photographic question.
No, I think
okay, there is we're 1 minute to go. Laura has asked for just a kind of sense check for us. What was the key thing you learned? It's always helpful for us to know, you know, if we were in the room with you, we'd tell by your body language whether we had made any impact anywhere or not, and why, but we don't because you're all on a screen. So your feedback would be really helpful to us and to the to Jen and her team too. Question of slides in the recording. Yes, good question. As far as I'm concerned, immediately after. Jen, do you want to answer?
Yeah, so it'll be in the following days. So we'll be sending out everything once the full CanWatch Academy is finished. So I believe that's 2 days from now. everyone should receive an email with the resources and survey, etc., that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Well, on behalf of the Comms Consult team, thank you all so much for hanging in there. Really excellent questions, really engaging conversations in the group. Wish you all the very, very best of luck. A bit of determination and doggedness in this rather difficult world we live in. We need us to be shoulders to the wheel even more than normal, I think. So thank you very much for your time. It's been great having you work with us on this.